And I am going to welcome everyone to our grand Louis Glunz Wines grand tasting experience that we have here in the Glunz Tasting Hall. We have a great opportunity to introduce today John and Stephen, who are both from European Cellars with the Eric Salomon selections, which are a brand new supplier to us, bringing in some beautiful wines from the Iberian Peninsula, as well as from the beautiful southern regions of France. They've got a lot to present as we are all new to these, and I want to go ahead and give the floor to them. Before doing so, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here quickly to what we all, I'm sure, thoroughly enjoy with the beautiful Google Earth presentation of where we are. Can Dan or Stephen, can you see that? Everybody see that all right?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, fantastic. So we all know this fabulous spot. We'll just go ahead and zoom in to the almost Arctic temperatures that we are enjoying here in Chicago, otherwise known as Siberia, and sneak out of the 6-degree weather we have with about 14 inches of snow in a lot of places, and head to the beautiful area of northern Spain, southern Europe, and into Catalonia, which is going to be where our first stop is. And we're going to run into the Terra Alta region, which is absolutely gorgeous, studded with vineyards everywhere, protected by the mountains on both sides. And then we're going to sneak over to Haranza Altas. Altas, is that right, Stephen? Is that correct pronunciation?
Yes, that's close enough. If you ever hear Nuria pronounce it, you'll stop pronouncing it yourself.
Fantastic.
We have someone in our company who's great at mimicking voices, and she can pronounce it exactly the way that Nuria says it.
Oh, I look forward to hearing that one. Then we're going to jump over on the further into the Catalan appellation, and the really cool view there with the consistent mountainous areas, almost like John's background, but those are the Rockies, and not to be confused, as I already did this morning. But you can definitely see the real cool texture of the land there in the Zaragoza region. Then we're going to sneak back out of Aragon and head over the Pyrenees into this beautiful country known as France, and shoot into the Côte de Roussillon and Saint Roch. And then this is the full area of the AOC that the winery is in. But they're right on the edge, and then the last wine we're going to have is actually right on the edge of the mountains here, that is topped by the fortress there up on the left. So without further ado, I am going to thank John and Stephen for being here. And John, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you as you'll be presenting today, and then Stephen's going to be the rock star graphic guy and shoot us some slides.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And hello, good morning to everybody. I hail from Denver, Colorado. So this is my background's the view from Mount Antero looking on Mount Princeton. I've been with Eric for 10 years and have had every job title imaginable, from custodial services up to national sales manager to general manager, and on and on. So I've been hired and fired by Eric many times, we like to joke, over the years. So I'm based in Denver, but I cover the West, including the Midwest. And Stephen, my compatriot, is our director of marketing, or words and pictures, as we like to say, hails from your very own Chicago. So all of us, I suppose, are having pretty frigid weather these days. Denver was about 12 this morning when I got up. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get into our presentation. Stephen, if you don't mind sharing your screen. So we're going to talk about European Cellars / Eric Solomon selections. And we're going to kind of go through some of the nuts and bolts of our portfolio so we have a good understanding of who we are and where we come from. And Stephen, this is your awesome slide, so I'll let you take this one.
Sorry for torturing everyone with PowerPoint this morning, but it bears a little explanation because there is confusion in the market because we have 3 portfolios under the rubric of European Cellars. And a little bit of background, European Cellars was founded in 1990 by Eric Solomon, primarily based on wines that he had discovered in the previous decade working for another company. In the Rhone Valley, the Languedoc, and the Roussillon. The company he previously worked for was focused mainly on Bordeaux and Burgundy, and they didn't have use for these wines. So when he started up his own company, he had the contacts to immediately launch with a fairly comprehensive portfolio focused on the south of France. Shortly after he launched his portfolio, he started receiving samples from Spain, a country that he never intended on representing, but he fell in love with it. And over the course of the next 10 years, up until the mid-aughts, he assembled probably one of the finest portfolios of Spanish wines represented in the United States. But through it all, he's always looked for wines that are very expressive of the place they come from and are made from the grape varieties that are indigenous there, which is one of the reasons why in the bottom of all these slides, you're going to see place over process, which is sort of his guiding mantra for his selections. So as it is now constituted, European Cellars is the original portfolio. It's the core business of our company. And it has the selection of wines that probably have the widest appeal for consumers. At the same time, because he's very curious and is always looking for new things in young producers, he created a secondary portfolio called Indigo Wines, which is still part of the Eric Solomon selections. And Indigo focuses on smaller growers, more experimental projects, and wines that are a little bit more challenging to sell and require a lot more explanation. And then finally, a former employee of his, John David Hedrick, created his own portfolio based on the Loire Valley and Champagne. He spun off that portfolio right around 2005. And then being a one-man operation was too difficult. He came back to our company about 2015, 2016. So those are the 3 portfolios under the European Cellars brand, essentially. I hope that makes sense. It's taken me 5 years to try to summarize this in a very concrete way. So enough about our company. Let's talk a little bit about Spain, which has really become essentially our calling card. What's remarkable about Spain is it has an ancient history of winemaking. But for various political reasons, it was never fully modernized until starting probably around 1990, which means that you have a overlay between traditional winemaking practices plus a lot of modern innovation. And that has resulted in an explosion of the number of Spanish wines and expressions now available in the market. One of the unique things about Spain is that with this ancient culture of winemaking, it also happens to be one of the highest elevation wine growing regions. Now, this doesn't mean all the vineyards are planted on mountains. It actually means that the high plateaus and the mesas of Spain are ideal for growing grape varieties. This far south, they require that elevation to provide freshness and balance to the wines. And while Spain has more acreage devoted to grapes than any other country in the world, it ranks about 5th in terms of the volume it produces, mainly because a lot of these vines are old, and because they're on very poor arid soils, they're very far, they're spaced far from each other. And then finally, I couldn't quite get the exact details, but I believe Italy has more indigenous grape varieties than Spain, but Spain is a very close second. all of this is to say, it is a wonderful place to find really unique expressions of wine in the world, and innovation and creative winemakers that are great at capturing what makes their terroir so specific. So let's start off in Terra Alta. And in fact, I've been there twice and I've never been able to take a bad photograph of the landscape. What's remarkable at Terra Alta is it's surrounded by these beautiful mountains. As you can see, it's so clear. I believe these are 20 kilometers away. It is so easy to see things because the prevailing climate here in the summertime is very dry. Just to situate you where we are, Terra Alta is to the southwest of Priorat, a region where Eric has a lot of experience, not only because he's married to one of the most famous winemakers there, Daphne Glorian, but in our portfolio, we have a wide selection of Priorat wines. A very short drive away is Terra Alta, just to the south and west. And the landscape here is almost entirely encircled by mountains, much like the Priorat, but the main difference is here the soils are a sandy clay, which locally is called Pinal. So the best vineyard sites are located on this sandy clay. And this is Garnacha country. This is the main grape variety that you will find planted here. And in fact, I found this very interesting statistic that 33% of all the Garnacha Blanca planted in the world is planted in Terra Alta. So it's really a repository of this grape variety and has an incredible diversity of Mosel selection that Herencia Altus promotes in their new plantings. So this is the couple behind Herencia Altus. This is Rafa de Haan, who comes from a Anglo-Spanish winemaking family and importers. And he met Nuria Altus, who's a native of Terra Alta, in the course of each doing their own projects. And they found out that they had a lot more in common than being interested in wines. And they partnered not only with Herencia Altus, but in life as well. So Nuria is the local with the local knowledge. Her family's been growing grapes in Terra Alta for many generations, and Rafa has the connections and export markets and marketing. And so together they're the ideal team for not only creating this project, but becoming ambassadors for what makes it so unique. So all of their vineyards are planted on these sandy soils. And for their entry-level Garnacha Blanca and their Rosé and their Garnacha Negra, what they're always looking for is a brightness of expression. So this is going to be slightly different from most of the Garnachas you taste from Spain, which have a tendency of being very rich, fairly alcoholic. They're always looking for a much more ethereal expression of the grape variety. And to achieve this for these entry-level wines, they're using entirely native yeast fermentations, and they're aging everything in concrete. And so as a result, what you will find is that there is much more of a Pinot-like expression to this Garnacha. We frequently say that in European cellars that Garnacha is the Pinot Noir of the Mediterranean. And it certainly has that capacity to show a much more lifted floral and delicate flavor profile, which makes it much different from a bulk of the Garnachas that are coming from Spain, which have a tendency to be much more alcoholic. There's much more of a new wood expression in these wines. And they're trying to differentiate themselves from the rest of Spanish Garnacha. One, because they have the terroir that makes that possible, but two, they're using winemaking techniques to express that more floral side.
Stephen, I'm going to interrupt. I just want to let everybody know, go ahead and we'll get started tasting. This is the first bottle that we'll be tasting that Stephen's speaking to now.
Just to reiterate, if I'm going to actually go back, one of the reasons why this region is so unique as well is because it's surrounded by mountains. the daytime temperatures build in the vineyard sites, and that causes the air to rise. And then the surrounding mountains sort of channel cold air down into these vineyards in the afternoon. So while it's certainly hot during the late morning, it cools off in the afternoon. If you were to visit the property in any direction you would look, the foothills and the mountains are littered with windmills for generation of electricity. And these are the conditions that have also allowed them to easily make the switch to entirely organic viticulture. And Robbie wanted me to point out probably one of the best values, one step up from the Garnacha Blanca, is the Benufet, which is a selection of their oldest vine, Garnacha Blanca. This wine is remarkable because for right around $20 a bottle, you get 100-year-old vine Garnacha Blanca that is as pure and rich and as amazing as any of the great white Priorates that cost 2 to 3 times per bottle. Are there any questions? I know that you all have the Garnacha in your glass. So if there are any questions, I'll pause to take them. And hopefully everyone has 2 glasses, because we're going to move on to the Evodia next. And this is a great comparison between these 2 styles of Garnacha.
Stephen, your comment about this being a little bit more Pinot-esque is spot on. That's really beautiful.
And it's one of the reasons that it frequently gets lost in our portfolio, because a lot of people think of Garnacha from Spain as being very rich, very fruit forward, very crowd pleasing. And they don't think of the more sort of like the more elegant style that works well when you sit down for a meal.
I wanted to say the exact same thing. You explained it, you described it so perfectly, and I'm a Pinot lover, and I have to have this wine. This is like, I just love it. It just surprised me so much, but I cannot wait to introduce my customers to this, because it's got this, the thing that I love in Garnacha, but I don't drink it a lot because of that high alcohol. Honestly, I don't like that. But this ripe raspberry and almost a little bit of licorice, but still kind of a little dusty, and it's so beautiful. I'd love to try that 100-year-old Garnacha Blanca too. Thank you so much. It was just a wonderful explanation.
Well, thanks.
Hey, Stephen.
It's entirely rough, and I'm just good at explaining it. They're the talent here. They're really the ones who keyed into the fact that there was a vacuum for an affordable, really beautifully detailed style of wine that wasn't being produced widely.
Hey, Stephen.
Yes.
We got a great question from Perry. Really enjoyed the Pinot Noir metaphor, and was wondering what you would compare Garnacha Blanca to white wine wise. I have my ideas, but I want you to go.
Yeah, I mean, you could push the analogy too far, but it occurs to me that in the hands of a really good producer, especially in Alsace, Pinot Blanc has this very distinctive like orange peel quality to it. And I find that in their Garnacha Blanca as well. But it is much more dense on the palate. So if you're thinking in terms of like the aromatics, it certainly captures Pinot Blanc. But if you're thinking about the texture and richness, it can have the weight of something like Roussanne, but without all the extra alcohol and that sort of bitter finish. This is much more clean, mineral, and precise, but with that beautiful orange peel aromas. What is your opinion, John?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think Pinot Blanc, either from the Dolomiti or kind of from Alsace, makes a lot of sense. I find Herencia Altez's entry-level Garnacha Blanca in particular, I find fascinating because it's got a viscosity that coats your palate without being waxy, but at the same time, this bracing acidic minerality. So it's really beautifully balanced. I agree about the orange peel as well.
So just to orient yourself, if you've got the Evodia and do a side-by-side comparison, you'll see that we are moving just across the border into an old kingdom of Spain called Aragon. And this is a completely different terroir. We are moving from a very light, sandy clay limestone soil to schist, which is a hard compressed volcanic rock that is as hard as it gets laid down in layers and pressed, so that if you pick up the right piece and you hit it against the ground, you can actually get it to cleave into separate plates. So this, we're moving from sort of an alluvial decomposition of limestone to something that comes from the bedrock. And one of the remarkable things about schist is it always seems to capture a darker, spicier profile to the Garnacha grape variety. And it also has this really mineral background. So you're going to be comparing dramatically different styles at a similar price that's almost entirely captured by the change in soil type. Now, a little bit of reference as well. It has long been speculated that this part of Spain, Calatayud, the Campo de Borja, the lands which are to the south and west of Zaragoza, is where the Garnacha grape originated. And this is where you find the greatest genetic diversity of Garnacha and where it's most widely planted. So Evodia is a project that Eric has had for well over 10 years, though he has worked with this cooperative, San Alejandro, since the year 2000. There will be, and I'm just going to skip forward one slide to explain this, and then we'll go back to the slide about the Evodia. Eric first discovered this cooperative and created a wine called Las Rocas, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. After several years of success, he sold that brand to Gallo, and he created Evodia at the same cooperative with the agreement that there would be no overlap in the style or sourcing of the fruit. And so he has made sure that if you were to taste Las Rocas next to Evodia, they are completely different wines. And so the flavor profile that he created with Las Rocas remains that flavor profile. And when he created Evodia, he decided he wanted to move in a different direction. So this slide, and I'll make sure that everyone has access to this PowerPoint, this basically breaks down the differences between the different cuvées. When we put together the blend for Evodia, and when I say we, it's mostly Eric, and everyone else sort of sits there amazed at his talent at putting together this blend. He is working with a smaller selection of vineyard sites from 3 villages in Calatayud. These are high elevation sites at 800 to 1,000 meters. These are mostly steeply sloped sites. So if you look at the slide, that's actually not tilted in any way. As you can see, the trees are upright. But the vines are on this crazy incline. He, through many years of tasting and putting together blends at San Alejandro, kept coming back to these as his favorite sites, mainly because they have a really precise mineral expression, but even the fruit itself, with its richness, still has a very lifted, very clear, precise quality to it. And that's what he wanted to showcase with Evodia when he put together this blend.
I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, Siri is harassing me. As a nod to making the wines much more different in style, he has moved away from using wood barrels and now prefers to age most of this cuvee in concrete, and that the French and American oak barrels and the concrete eggs are mainly to add the extra components to complete the blend.
The blueberry aromatics that come off the nose on this wine are just unbelievable. You know, you always have hints and lightness to it, but you know, there's no likeness to it at all. It is like smashed blueberries aromatically. It's unbelievable.
And that's really what he's trying to capture with this cuvee, is like such a pure expression of fruit, and like the expression you get when you bite into an actual piece of fruit instead of the flavor you get from like a jam or a jelly. And it's really to capture that balance between sweet fruit and acidity that is the goal with this cuvee.
It's why Eric called it Evodia. That's Greek for perfume.
Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. I have to apologize. There was a little bit of miscommunication. And so the next few projects we talk about, we won't have wines for you to taste. Also, one project was omitted from this presentation, but when we get to Ribera del Duero, the section which I will be covering in a bit, we can go ahead and taste the Creta, and I can talk about that project. So we're going to talk briefly about Tempranillo, and mainly because you will be working with one of the families that we represent, which is the Anton family, which owns properties in Rioja, Ribera del Duero, and Toro. And the reason why they started properties in these regions is that they were particularly taken with the Tempranillo grape variety. And it is probably, if you were to quiz someone, what's Spain's most important grape variety? A lot of people would mention Tempranillo, mainly because of its long association with Rioja, Ribera del Duero, and Toro. Now, as a testament to how widespread this grape variety is in Spain and how locally important it is, it changes names as you move from region to region. So Tinto Fino, Tinto del País, Sensibel, Ulda and Tinto Roriz in Portugal are all synonymous with the Tempranillo grape variety. It just means that it's set down roots somewhere and it sort of has adapted itself to the local climate, and then it gets its own name. Now, one of the things it shares in common is the regions where it does best are continental climates within Spain. So all of these regions are pretty far away from the ocean and have no influence from the surrounding seas that really make Spain so unique in Europe. And then finally, it is expressive of terroir, but much more as a reaction to temperature. This is a grape variety that really shows how, if you move to different regions, how temperature, how the ripening changes the flavor profile of the wines. And each of the regions of Rioja, Ribera del Duero, and Toro, while they share in common the varietal expression of Tempranillo, the differences are really captured in the differences between the weather of these three regions. So a little bit about the Anton family. They started out as restaurateurs in the Basque Country of Spain, and decided that they wanted to get into winemaking at a very opportune time in the late 80s, when vineyard land was still reasonably inexpensive in Rioja. And so they founded first Azadi in 1987, followed shortly, well, not so shortly afterwards, but an explosion within a couple years of founding VTH in Toro, Orben, a separate project in Rioja, and they purchased an existing estate, Finca Villa Cresces in Ribera del Duero in 2004. And so they are the family that brings a significant proportion of the Tempranillo that we represent. They are the ones that produce it. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about Rioja before moving on. Rioja to me, if you had asked me 10 years to describe Rioja, I would probably be better at it than I am now. The more I try and learn about Rioja wines, the more confusing it is for me. And that's mainly because Rioja has not made it easy. Rioja is a place that has 3 different regions. You have Rioja Alta, Rioja Alavesa, and Rioja Baja. And at the same time, if you look at the soil types, they're completely different. That there's no common thread that distinguishes Rioja Alavesa from Rioja Alta when you're north of the Ebro River Valley. And so Bodegas Azadi is never going to have a sub-region on their labels like Alta or Alavesa, mainly because they're more focused on the terroir. And if you look at the map above, that triangle is actually the zone where their vineyards are located. And you can see that it straddles the border between Alavesa and that small portion of Rioja Alta that juts up north of the Ebro River Valley. If you look over at the soil types, you'll see that they're nearly identical. So we generally do not talk about the subzones of Rioja so much as the soil types that the vineyards are planted in. And just to give you an idea of what the landscape that they're working in is, all of their vineyards are within sight of the Sierra de Cantabria Mountains, which gives an indication. I always like to tell people, if you want to see what the soils are like, look up. The soils are deposited from erosion from the Sierra Cantabria, and you can see from their color that these are limestone peaks, and limestone plays a big part in the formation of the soils of this part of Rioja. And then once again, to reiterate, Azadi is farming within a triangle demarcated by the villages of Abalos, south of Villabuena de Álava, and then don't know the village up in the northeast that would be the closest, but you can see that this triangle of land is quite close to the Sierra Cantabria just to the north. Now, style at Azadi is slowly changing, but they're always trying to walk the fine line between a modern fruit expression, which is more modern in its richness and precision. They adhere to the standard aging regimen, but they don't like their wines to show too much of that traditional leathery quality. They will use American oak for their Reserva, about 75%. And in that case, it does show a little bit more of what people associate with traditional Rioja. So that's why I say they walk the line between a classical and a modern expression. And then to review later at your leisure, sort of a breakdown of the different cuvées they make and what makes them unique from one another. Now, Orben is a project that they launched mainly because outside of the triangle of vineyards that they had, they also had some old vines in LaGuardia. And after many years of trying to work these vines into their regular project, it occurred to them that the character and expression of this fruit from these old vines was much darker, much richer, and didn't quite fit in with the fruit they were getting from the zone that most of their vineyards are located. Feeling that this quality of fruit was ideal for making a modern expression of Rioja, they decided to segregate it and launch a smaller side project called Orben. And so the main difference between Orben and Azadi is Orben is going to be for more of your modern a fan of Rioja, something richer, darker fruit, a much more tannic expression. And this is entirely aged in French oak and a lot of new woods. So these are also wines that are great for collectors as well. Now moving on to Ribera del Duero.
Stephen, can we back up 1 second?
Sure.
Sir, we just had a specific question about Malpuesto.
Yes.
So this is a great slide to answer that question really quickly. So Stephen already spoke of Orben, which is the main project, and that project also releases one single vineyard wine called Malpuesto. Quite literally translates to badly placed. If you have a chance to walk in the vineyard, you'll see why there are no rows. It's so rocky. They couldn't plant vineyard rows. It's pure Tempranillo and a really serious, beautiful, but more modern expression.
So with Ribera del Duero, I posed the question, if Rioja has the capacity to be Burgundy-like in its varied expressions of Tempranillo, is Ribera del Duero Bordeaux? And there are several parallels to Bordeaux that I think are worth highlighting. One is historically this region, especially if you consider what's called the Golden Mile or the far western edge of Ribera del Duero, this is home to a lot of estates that are based around either a modern cellar building or a very traditional, almost palatial-like family home, and then surrounded entirely by vineyards. So these operate, in this part of Ribera del Duero, these properties operate like Chateau in Bordeaux. Also, there is a long history of Bordelaise grape varieties being planted in this part of Ribera del Duero. And so you do see a lot of exchange of information between Ribera del Duero and Bordeaux. But I think fundamentally, more importantly, is that this is a river terroir, in that successive waves of floods and erosion have created these benches of deep soils, of layers of gravel and sand and clay and gravel and sand and clay that rivals some of the complexity of the subsoils you find in Bordeaux as well. Now, Ribera del Duero is also, in terms of temperature and of sunshine, it's a much hotter region in Spain for growing Tempranillo. And so there's a tendency for the wines to be bigger, to be richer, and to have much more of a dark fruit expression. At Finca Villa Crescis, the main grape variety is Tinto Fino, but as you can see from their vineyard maps, they do have smaller plantings of Merlot and Cabernet as well. Now, there are two wines I'd like to highlight from Finca Villa Crescis, and they're really a contrast in style. Because they are located adjacent to the Duero River, they have both sandier soils as well as rockier soils with higher clay content. And as they were sort of learning how this, this contiguous terroir operated, they started to notice a difference in the fruit expression between these two main types of soils. And they now produce two different cuvées, the Pruno, and then their estate Ribera del Duero, that are focused on the two separate terroirs. And so these come from vineyards about the same age, 35 years old, but the main difference is these sandier soils don't take to wood aging particularly well in terms of new wood. And so they age this cuvée entirely in second and third fill barrels. And their estate wine, as you can see from the soil on the left, is rocky clay soils. This is a much more structured, much more stern, darkly fruited wine. And as a result, this is one that does see the new wood at about 50% of the barrels. And in terms of price, I find that Villa Crescis, particularly for its address, is the best value. And by address, I mean that Vega Sicilia is immediately to their, immediately to their west, and then immediately to their north are several vineyards that go into Pingus. So if you're looking for quality based on address, these wines really do over-deliver for their price. Now I'm going to go back to the map of Ribera del Duero to talk about Creta, which you have in your glass, or should have in your glass. I believe there are samples. This is
yes, that is our third bottle from Spain.
So if you look at Ribera del Duero, we have been talking about the far western edge of the zone, but it is an incredibly complex and diverse region. And we work with Rafa Dahan, who you might remember from Rafa and Nuria, the people behind Herencia Altes. We work with them to create a wine called Creta. And the name of the wine refers to clay-rich limestone soils, which you can find up in the north and western part of Ribera del Duero in the province of Burgos. And so our goal here was to work with a collection of Tempranillo vineyards that are planted on this chalky limestone soil. And what we find in Tempranillo on this soil type is that it has really precise sort of pinpoint tannins, and in a wonderful sort of chocolatey dark fruit flavor expression, which is going to be very different from what you find in the western edge of Ribera del Duero. John, is there anything you want to add about the Creta?
I don't think so. I think you covered it pretty roundly.
See, what happens when I don't have slides is I'm much more precise. The other goal with this wine is to present a really good, honest expression of Tempranillo in Ribera del Duero at a reasonable price.
Quick question from Perry. Is Creta made at Villa Cresces? No, in fact, it's not. And sorry for the confusion there. We're operating off of Villa Cresces slides because I missed Creta as part of the presentation, so that's my fault. Creta is actually a project of somebody that we met earlier in the presentation, Rafa Dahan of Herencia Altes. So his family has holdings in Ribera del Duero, and he makes the wine at his facility there. So completely separate project from Finca Villa Cresces.
Yes, I'm just on this slide to show you the diversity. This stretched out appellation or DO encompasses a lot of different terroirs. And so I wanted to indicate that the province of Burgos is where you find a lot of the clay and chalky soils that make this wine so distinctive. And then we'll round out our presentation on the Anton family projects with talking briefly about Toro. Toro has a reputation for producing really big, oaky, rustic styles of wine. And that is just in the early stages of beginning to evolve to something a little bit more fresh, a little bit more precise. A lot of the really famous names in Toro are grouped around the Duero River, which is in the northern part of the DO. And VTH is somewhat unique in that it is a little bit more off the beaten track. And as you move away from the Duero River, the soils become sandier and lighter. And so while you still have like the very dense, rich, ripe fruit and touch of rusticity, which I find characteristic in Toro wines, you have a much more elegant and lifted expression as you move into these sandier terroirs. And their main production is a wine called Flor de VTH, and it comes in two different flavors. If we go back to the map, there is sort of an interlocking dance between Toro and Rueda, especially in the minds of Spanish wine drinkers. The two regions are located next to one another. You will find Tempranillo and Verdejo planted in both regions, though the tendency is that it's far more Tempranillo in Toro than in Rueda, and vice versa, far much more Verdejo in Rueda than you will find Tempranillo. And so when they decided to create a white wine for the Toro label, they went over to Rueda to source the vines, because there they could find old vines of Rueda at a very reasonable price, and they could also stipulate organic farming. And so that is their lineup. Now, these are meant to be fruit expressions of these grape varieties, Tinta del País and Verdejo, and are meant to show more of the fruit side rather than the rusticity or the power that comes from a long élevage in oak. And of course, because I love explainer slides, for future reference, a breakdown. I always try to include the production numbers, so you really have a sense of how each cuvee is important to the property in terms of sales. And then before, this is our last property before we move to France, and we will talk briefly about Monastrell. We have so far hit upon 2 grape varieties which are indigenous to Spain, Garnacha and Tempranillo, and now we're going to talk about the third major grape variety that has Spain as its birthplace, and that is Monastrell. Many of you will know it by its French name, because the French always steal everything and then rename it. So this is the Mourvèdre grape. What's unique about Mourvèdre, especially in the south of France, is that it has a very distinctive sagey medicinal quality. And that's because the south of France just isn't quite hot enough to ripen this grape variety, the same way that its birthplace, Murcia, is able to do. And the 3 regions that are probably the most famous for Monastrell at this point are Almansa, Yecla, and Jumilla. And we will be talking about Jumilla, which is where Casa Castillo is located. This is Jose Maria Vicente, who is the owner and winemaker at Casa Castillo. And as you can see, he's very much a hands-on a winemaker. So while a lot of owners, you won't find them harvesting grapes, Jose Maria is someone who spends most of his time in the vineyards. And he has become probably the most influential winemaker of his generation in Spain. And that's primarily because he has taken a grape variety, Monastrell, which a lot of people have dismissed as sort of a grape best suited for simple country wines. And he's elevated it to some of the best red wines produced in Spain. If you stumble across a young, really innovative, exciting new producer in Spain, chances are they've worked at some point in their career with Jose Maria. Now, the property itself is fairly well established. The winery itself dates back to the 19th century and was created by a French winemaker who escaped Bordeaux to come to Murcia to make wine because his family's vineyards in Bordeaux had been decimated by phylloxera. And once the vineyards were replanted in France, he left and the winery was abandoned, but traces of vineyards and vines remained. And when the Vicente family purchased this property in 1941, it was mostly used to grow rosemary. Now, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Jose Maria and his father recognized the history of this estate for making wines and decided to start replanting their vineyards. And luckily, he had just the right connections. Not only did he have an ancient vineyard of Monastrell, which he used as the source for all of his new plantings, but he had early contacts in the south of France and got really good clones of Syrah, which he planted in the coolest parts of his vineyards, and also got some Grenache from the Rhone, as well as some Garnacha from neighbors in the rest of Jumilla and Murcia as well. This property was once known for producing a very rich modern style of wine, and he's moved in the direction of producing a much more detailed and ethereal expression of the grape varieties that he grows. And I encourage everyone, if they're in Spain, if you can work it into your itinerary to visit this property, because this is hands down the best paella I've ever had in all of Spain. And interestingly enough, this is landlocked, so it's always made with rabbit and snails. And he harvests the snails from his own vineyards, and he actually harvests the rabbits from his vineyards as well. Now, the mainstay wine at the property used to go by the name Monastrell. That is changed. That will be changing to Jumilla over the next few vintages, and that is because the cuvee now contains about 20% Garnacha, with plans to expand that to 20% Garnacha and an additional 20% Syrah. This is really meant to be sort of the everyday expression of fruit from Jumilla. And then in addition to this, he makes two mid-tier wines, right around $20 a bottle. One is from older vines on clay limestone rich soils, a similar blend to the Jumilla in that it includes 1/4 of Garnacha. And then interestingly, he is making probably one of the most remarkable Garnachas I've tasted from a hot climate, in that it still retains this bright freshness and juiciness despite the heat. And then finally, his two top wines, Las Gravas and Pie Franco, show the richness and concentration that he's able to achieve from his oldest vines, but at the same time, threaded with this wonderful minerality and acidity that makes these wines truly remarkable. And it may be strange after talking so much about Spain to suddenly talk about France, but because of history, this part of France is rather unique in that linguistically, culturally, and in terms of winemaking, it shares much more in common with Catalonia than it does with the rest of the French wine growing regions. Historically, until 1659, this was in fact part of Spain, and you'll still find similar customs and a language which bears much more in common with Catalonian than it does with French as it's spoken. And we're going to focus on a small region within the Greater Roussillon, and that is the Morée Valley. If you can call up from your memory banks that satellite view, it captured perfectly what makes this region of the Roussillon so unique. And that is that to the north are the Corbière Mountains, and then there's the uplands of central Catalonia just to the south. And then the river that flows between those two peaks is the Aigle River. And it not only deposited all the schist soils from the south and west, but it also deposited a lot of clay and limestone from the Corbière Mountains to the north. And also it forms a wind channel between inland France and the Mediterranean. So not only is this a hot region, but it's also extraordinarily windy, as you can see from the vine that's essentially pushed over in the picture above. Now, why we're excited about Morée is it's not only a unique terroir, but it's the birthplace of Jean-Marc Lafarge. This is the town he grew up in, and this is where he made his first wine. And so while he's relatively more famous for his estate called Domaine Lafarge, when he had the opportunity to purchase Chateau Saint-Roch in Morée, he jumped at the opportunity to return home and showcase the style of wines that are possible here. Do you have a sample of Chateau Saint-Roch? Remind me which cuvee it is.
Yes, we do have it. It is the Chamaris.
Okay.
And this is the 2016 vintage.
2016, okay. So Chimère is always a Grenache based blend, and the Grenache comes from the black slate of Moree, and the Syrah, which is the other main component of this blend, comes from further down the Ailey Valley on soils that have much more clay and limestone in them. Syrah doesn't do particularly well within Moree itself, and so that's why this wine is labeled. I believe it's it changes, but I believe it's Côte de Roussillon, or is it Côte de Roussillon Village?
I believe it's the Village.
Okay. If it was all from Moree itself, it could bear the appellation Moree Sec. This is a wine that the Grenache proportion is aged in concrete, and then a little bit of the Grenache gets blended with the Syrah and is aged in French oak barrels. Jean-Marc has moved to using almost exclusively 500-liter barrels at this point, and only refreshes about 20% of them, because he doesn't want the wood expression so much as he wants the Syrah, which can be reductive, to be exposed to some oxygen. So the main difference, if you have a customer who asks you what is the difference between Saint-Roch and Domaine Lafage, is Domaine Lafage sources grapes from 5 different terroirs in the Roussillon. Each has a unique expression, and he blends them together to create different interlocking puzzle pieces that he feels shows something different about the Roussillon. Chateau Saint-Roch is really focused on the Aiguille Valley, which is that northern valley in the Roussillon, and shows a greater amount of concentration, dark fruit flavors, and because of the schist in the soils, that wonderful refreshing minerality in the finish.
Stephen, we were talking in the chat earlier, going back to Herencia Altez and Evodia, just what a difference the soil makes. And so I was saying, just wait till we get to the Roussillon. So just a question for the group, can you note how different the Grenache component is here? I'm going to assume that's a yes.
There's another interesting overlap between Domaine or Chateau Saint-Roch, Domaine Lafage, and the Evodia, and that is Eric Salmon first met Jean-Marc Lafage at San Alejandro in Calatayud. He was the consulting winemaker for the cooperative. And so there is, Jean-Marc is still involved in the vinification of the Evodia. And so you will find his hallmark purity of fruit, a creamy mid palate texture, a plushness, and an approachability. There's a sensibility in Evodia, and Chateau Saint-Roch that's quite similar.
So I think that's it from our side. We're opening it up for some questions now, if anybody has any. Well, I thank you again for having us all on. It's been nice to share this part of our portfolio with you. We're super excited about our new relationship with Glunz, and look forward to a day where we can see everybody on the call in person in some way.
Yes, John and Stephen, definitely wish we were doing this in person, along with all of our customers that are online, as well as our sales team. But having the great slides done by Stephen, John, I can appreciate why you didn't do much speaking. Stephen, you did a great job.
Sorry. What's really amusing is that I feel like I use up all my words either by writing or educating people about wines, so that when my husband comes home at night, it's usually just sullen silence for me.
Well, you rocked it. It was fantastic. Very well done. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the samples that we had tasted. We have a lot of new wines. This is the first tastings that we've done through Louis Glunz Wines with the European Cellars selections. And we have more wines that are on the water and coming. So a lot of the wines that Stephen and John have spoke of, you will be getting the opportunity to continue to sell and taste through your sales team with Glunz. So without any further questions, are there any more, John, that just came in?
Don't see any more questions, Joe.
Okay.
One last note from me. I'm pretty easy. If you can remember, I'm John at EuropeanCellars.com. If you think of a question, feel free to reach out. And always you can get a hold of me through Joe and the Glunz team too.
Awesome. And this entire production will be being recorded and will be available for everyone via response to your RSVP to that email. You'll get the slideshow, which Stephen will forward to me. I'll put in up on our website as well. And both those will be downloadable and accessible through glunzwines.com. And at that point, I would love to thank you both and all of you guys for coming and joining us today. And hope you enjoy and are able to join us on Monday for our next masterclass. Thanks so much, all.
Awesome.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.